The road back to her house felt quieter than she remembered, the trees on either side standing like witnesses, as if they knew something she didn't. She parked outside but didn't get out right away. She just sat staring at the front door, her home, her battlefield, her proof that she had once believed in forever. She finally stepped out, her legs heavy, her chest hollow. The world felt smaller without the illusion she had lived inside. Inside, the air smelled like yesterday's coffee and stale rain. She walked through each room slowly, the sound of footsteps echoing off the hardwood. She paused at his desk, the one he always kept locked, except the key was still there, lying carelessly beside the lamp. She hesitated, then turned at the drawer, creaked open, the smell of old paper rising like memory. She saw folders, receipts, a photo album she didn't recognize, and one envelope yellowed soft, with time, her name written on the front in his handwriting. She sat down, her heart thudding, and opened it. Inside was a letter dated years before she met him. The handwriting rushed, uneven, as if written between breaths. Martha, if you ever find this, I owe you what I never told you before. The words blurred as her eyes filled, but she kept reading. There was another life before you. Her name was Claire. She gave me a daughter. I lost them both. I never learned how to carry that grief, so I buried it under work, under miles, under stories I told myself were true. But the guilt followed me. It built walls between me and the world, and I was a coward who thought starting over would erase what I left behind. She sat frozen, the words sinking slowly like stones through water. She flipped the page and found a photo, a girl maybe 6 years old, smiling, gap-toothed, holding a stuffed bear, the edges of the photo worn from being handled too often. She turned it over, a date and the name Lily written in David's hand. Her throat tightened as realization bloomed. This wasn't the other woman's child, this was his past, the wound he had been hiding beneath every lie. She felt something unfamiliar rise, not just anger but a strange, fragile compassion. That evening, sat by the window again, the city outside humming with life, while inside everything was still. She whispered to herself, you were trying to heal, and all you did was hurt us both. She didn't know if forgiveness was possible, but she understood now that pain doesn't vanish just because you start over, it only waits. She closed the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope, then pulled out her phone and typed one message to David. I found the truth, you should tell me the rest in person. David read it hours later, sitting in his car outside a motel parking lot, the guilt pressing against his ribs until it hurt. He typed back, I'll come tomorrow, and she replied, just bring honesty, nothing else. The next morning was pale and quiet. She made coffee for one, the smell filling the kitchen. She sat waiting, not in fear but in resolve. When he finally arrived, he looked older, the weight of sleepless nights etched into his eyes. He held the envelope in his hands as if it were both confession and burden. She gestured for him to sit, the silence between them thick but not hostile, just heavy with everything unsaid. He started to speak, then stopped, searching for words. I didn't mean to lie, he said finally. I just didn't know how to live with what I'd done. She nodded once. Tell me about her. He looked down, the letter in his hands trembling. Her name was Lily, she said quietly. I know. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. She smiled sadly. I found the picture. She was beautiful. He told her then about the accident, about the years of running, about how meeting her felt like a second chance, and how he'd ruined it by carrying his secrets like stones in his pockets, weighing down every truth he tried to tell. She listened silently, tears glistening, but no anger, just grief for all that could never be fixed. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his for a brief, fragile moment before pulling back. I can't promise forgiveness, she said, but I can promise to understand. He nodded, unable to speak. When he left, she stood by the window again, watching him drive away, the road gleaming under morning light. She whispered, not goodbye, just be better. She turned back to the kitchen, poured out the remaining coffee, and opened the window, letting the cool air rush in. The city felt wider now, freer. She realized that closure wasn't something he could give her, it was something she had just taken back for herself. 3 days passed in slow motion, the world moving around Martha while she moved through it like a ghost. She went to work, answered emails, smiled at strangers, but her mind was elsewhere. She could still hear David's voice, the way it shook when he said Lily's name. It wasn't the voice of a liar anymore, it was the voice of a man finally tired of lying, the voice of a man trying to learn how to speak the truth again. She kept telling herself closure doesn't need an audience, and yet she knew this wasn't finished. That evening she drove to the pier where they once watched the sun fall behind the water. He was already there, leaning against the railing, the wind pushing at his hair. He didn't look up until she was close. For a moment neither of them spoke, the air between them filled with everything they'd ever said and everything they hadn't. Then he handed her a small box, plain wood, worn at the edges. Inside were Lily's letters, drawings, tiny memories saved like fragments of a life he couldn't let go. She looked at them quietly and said, "Thank you for not hiding her anymore." He nodded, his voice low. "I kept running because I was afraid to lose everything again, and I ended up losing you instead," she answered softly. "Maybe you didn't lose me, maybe you just ran too far to find me." He smiled for the first time in weeks, a small broken smile, the kind people wear when they've stopped pretending to be fine. He said, "I don't deserve another chance," and she replied, "Maybe not, but we both deserve peace." They talked for hours about the years they had, about what was real and what was made of fear. He confessed that the second life he built had been an escape, a way to feel useful to someone again. She confessed that she had seen the signs but chose blindness over loneliness. The truth didn't heal everything, but it stopped the bleeding. They stood there as the lights on the water shimmered and the sky shifted from blue to black. She took a deep breath and said, "I can't promise what comes next, but I can promise I'll remember you with truth, not with lies." He nodded. "I can live with that." When they parted, there was no grand gesture, no music, just two people finally done with pretending. She walked back to her car, the box in her hands light but heavy with meaning. He stayed by the railing watching the waves, both of them knowing that whatever came after would be built on truth or not at all. As she drove home, the wind through the window felt different, cleaner, like a beginning without a name.
The morning after their meeting, the sky felt different, the kind of light that doesn't belong to anyone. Martha woke before the alarm, the box of drawings still on the table beside her. She ran her fingers over the lid, tracing the grain of the wood as if the past could speak through it. She thought of David, at the pure of the look in his eyes when he said peace, and she realized that was what she wanted, more than forgiveness, more than answers. She wanted quiet inside herself again. She made coffee in silence, each movement deliberate, as if rebuilding a ritual from the ground up. Later she walked through the city, the same streets that once carried the weight of her routines, now feeling unfamiliar and new. She passed a bookstore she used to love, the window full of stories about healing and second chances. She smiled faintly at the irony and went inside, the smell of paper and ink wrapping around her like comfort. She bought a notebook, blank pages waiting for her own story. She would not write about betrayal, she decided she would write about survival, about how sometimes the hardest truth becomes the doorway to a freer life. David, meanwhile, had gone back to his apartment, the silence heavy but not unbearable. He had sent a message that morning, no demands, no apologies, just "I'm proud of you for finding your way." He didn't expect a reply, and that was fine. He sat with Lily's last drawing on the table, a small heart in crayon with the words, "Love doesn't end, it just changes." He finally believed that. He folded the paper carefully and placed it in the box again. The box he planned to give to Martha one day when they could talk without ghosts between them. That night Martha sat on the balcony of her apartment, the city humming below, the stars dim but present. She opened the new notebook and wrote the first line, "Today I chose myself, not because I stopped loving but because I started living." She closed it and let the wind flip the pages, the sound soft like distant applause. She thought of David, not with anger now but with gratitude. He had broken her illusions, and somehow that had given her back her strength. She whispered into the night, "Thank you for the lesson." A few days later she drove to the ocean alone, the same place they had once promised to visit together. She parked by the shore, the wind tangling her hair, the horizon endless. She walked until the water touched her feet, cold, sharp, real. She took a deep breath and let the salt sting her skin. It felt like being awake for the first time. She took the photo of Lily from her pocket, the one she had kept, and let the tide carry it away, not to erase but to release. She stood there until the sun dipped low, her heart steady, her mind clear. She knew now that closure wasn't a door closing, it was the courage to walk through it.
When she turned to leave, her phone buzzed, a new message from an unknown number. It read, "I hope you found peace." She smiled but didn't reply. She didn't need to. The sea behind her whispered the rest. She walked toward her car, the wind at her back, the world wide open before her. Weeks became months, the seasons beginning to turn again, the city soft with spring light. Martha had moved to a smaller place near the edge of town, sunlight spilling through wide windows. Every morning she still woke early, made coffee, still wrote in her notebook, the pages now half filled with thoughts that didn't ache anymore. She had found a quiet job at a gallery, arranging paintings, talking to strangers about and light, things that reminded her that beauty didn't disappear just because trust once had. Sometimes she would walk by the ocean, the same one where she had let Lily's photo drift away. She would stand there, shoes off, feet in the sand, watching the water breathe in and out. She thought of David not with longing but with understanding. Some stories are meant to end without villains, some simply fade into wisdom. She smiled at that idea and whispered a small prayer for the child she never met and the man she once loved. David now lived 2 hours north, a modest house by the hills. Mornings spent fixing things in the garden, evenings writing letters he never sent. One day he received a small package with no return address. Inside was a single sheet from a notebook, the words in Martha's hand read, "Peace is not forgetting, it is remembering without pain." He held it for a long time, then placed it in the box with Lily's drawings and closed the lid softly as if tucking both ghosts to sleep. Months later, Martha's first art exhibit opened. Small quiet pieces about light and absence. The gallery buzzed with gentle conversation, and she stood near the corner watching people stop to look at her work. She felt no need to explain the stories behind them, they existed on their own. Now she noticed one visitor, an older man lingering by a painting of an empty chair, sunlight spilling across the floor. He smiled at her and said, "It feels like forgiveness." She smiled back. "Maybe it is," she said, and the man nodded and moved on. That night after the exhibit, she walked home alone, the city glowing around her, a warm wind following her steps. She looked up at the sky and thought of all the nights she had sat waiting for a message, for a call, for a reason, and realized she didn't need any of it anymore. She had become her own reason, her own story. She whispered into the dark, "I made it." The words simple but final. She closed the door behind her, turned off the lights, and let the silence hold her, not as emptiness but as peace.